And thank you guys for joining me for another episode of Fresh Brewed Kentucky Politics. I'm a little wet from the protest over the watered-in Scareway. 296 protesters. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. And as always, guys, please hit the share button. We're going to have Chris Wiest giving us a legal update on everything. As well, we're going to talk about the protest and also go woke or go broke. What are these companies doing to... Is it a good call for these good corporations to suddenly get involved in elections? We're going to talk a little bit more about that. I invite you guys to come on down to the coffee shop and support us, or you can go to brewedco.com, brewedco.com, shop.brewedco.com, or donate.brewedco.com if you just want to give us money because, you like us. I don't know. But please hit that share button. We're going to have Chris joining us to give us a legal update here. Thanks for joining us today, Chris, and answering all of our questions. We have three major things going on, of course. Our case in Boone County. We've got Judge Shepard had a pre-hearing conference today. And then as well, we have, I wanted to discuss a little bit about this whole House Joint Resolution 77, how these cases all play together. There's some confusion online about it. So just kind of so people kind of understand what's going on there. How'd Boone County go today?
So, good news, bad news. I mean, he did not let Brood in the case. Obviously, he did let Beans amend. And we've got actually a full trial date. I mean, he's going to do a bench trial, sort of collapse the schedule. May 17th, we're going to be, in trial. He knows we've got a class certification motion that I'm going to file tomorrow.
And what's that mean so people understand? Kind of what's the class certification mean and
so,
what is
this? So what we're intending to do is to make it applicable the orders that we're seeking. In other words, that the governor has to comply with House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2 and HJR 77 to make it applicable kind of statewide, although we're discussing internally this afternoon how broad that may be, whether or not it's just going to apply to all restaurants and bars in the state, because that's the plaintiff that we have right now. There's been some internal discussion over here, both with myself and my co-counsel about, maybe doing another case with Brood and some other restaurants. In light of the fact that you couldn't join the Boone case, we'll just file another case, because that's everything the governor wants and needs, just one more lawsuit. But, he kind of brought him on himself. I mean, I'd be like, get everybody we can so we don't have to keep doing the same thing again. But they don't have that view. I don't know why they don't have that view other than, they're all their eggs are in the Judge Shepard basket. But, that's kind of what we're discussing over here is doing another lawsuit. We haven't done one in Campbell County. I think we like the judges over there. So, there's some discussion about maybe parking a case over there. We've got some restaurants that are interested. So, and we may tee up with some private plaintiffs, the mask mandate over in Campbell. So, we're looking at those issues. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff going on. So they were in court this morning also at 9:30 with Judge Shepard for a quote unquote pretrial conference. And I got a bit of an update because, all of the lawyers that are sort of dealing with these issues, both at the Attorney General's office and in the legislature, we talk. Judge Shepard is hot to trot to get that case to trial so that he can issue the orders that he wants to issue. The legislature's like, whoa, not so fast. We're entitled not to be brought to trial. We have immunity. We know you denied the immunity order, but guess what? We're going to appeal. And once they appeal, Judge Shepard's really without jurisdiction to proceed to trial, at least with the legislative defendants. So, by him keeping them in, even though I think he should have bounced them, he sort of sealed his own fate in terms of a drawn-out schedule, which I think is really interesting. He kind of cut his nose off to spite his face. But so I anticipate him not being able to proceed to trial in that case while these immunity issues are pending in the appeals courts, because it's not just immunity just sort of in the general nature, but it's actually immunity from suit. You're not even allowed to be a party to the lawsuit. The legislature's not. So the fact that Judge Shepard issued this weird order saying that they could be parties, that's immediately appealable. I hear they may be looking at a writ action in the Court of Appeals against Judge Shepard, where he's the defendant, sort of arguing that he's patently without jurisdiction insofar as the legislature is concerned, which is going to be another sort of monkey wrench,
into the problem.
for the Judge Shepard action. So, that is a mess. But when you go and you do what the governor did, which is sort of preemptively file a lawsuit for an advisory opinion, it's bound to be a mess, right? I mean,
the AG can go do that to the governor and everything else, or police or things like that. That is something, I think that's what a lot of people don't understand how weird it is that the AG can go and file an injunction to stop a law from being enforced if they say it's unconstitutional. That would be more common. The weird thing about this is the person who enforces the laws, the governor, is injunctifying other people from doing things, which is why cases like Boone County or the Scott County case that occurred, I know that's not one of yours, has such standing, is because, they can't, Judge Shepard, they're not a party to that case. So it's really strange.
Right. And Judge Brueggemann made that point on the record today that he thinks Judge Shepard's issuing orders outside of his authority. I don't know if we'll see that. We should get an order today or tomorrow on that motion to amend. I don't know if we'll actually see that in there. I kind of hope we do. For obvious reasons, because I've been spouting it over the internet for the last month and a half that what Judge Shepard's doing is against 100 years of case law in Kentucky. And, and I think I would love to have a court say, that I'm right. I always like it when courts say that I'm right versus when courts say that I'm wrong.
Of course.
So, I don't know if we'll see it now. I do think we'll see it by the end of the case. Judge Privet sort of addressed, he sort of danced around it a little bit Friday in his order on those 3 business plaintiffs, where he said, that he's not bound by Judge Shepard's rulings, and he proceeded to enter the injunctive relief that he did Friday. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, and obviously beyond the bars and the restaurants, the other thing that people are just obviously screaming about is the mask mandate. We have raised the mask mandate issues in this case. I may raise it a little more forcefully in another case. If we do one more in Campbell, we're going to figure that out. It's interesting. I had one of the governor's followers get on my law firm Facebook page, which isn't the same as my personal Facebook page, and say, well, you guys are just parking these cases in Scott and Boone, and why is it always Scott and Boone? And I'm like, it's Boone. Why I do my cases in Boone because it's 5 minutes down the road,
right?
But I don't mind Campbell County either. There are generally speaking, both the judges in Boone, are fairly, not always, but fairly reliable followers of the law. Deference to the legislature, everything judges should be. Fairly reliable, and I kind of think we'll get the same thing in Campbell, and we get the same thing, if we wanted down in Whitley County with Judge Ballou. There's a bunch of judges around the state that are follow the law judges. It's not like we're just parking it in
choosing one random one that you like. Just because you like that one, you're saying, hey, these are the judges in the areas these cases are. They're the ones with hearings. They're close to you.
Yeah, I really like the Boone Circuit Court and the judge that's got this case, but not because I think that we're guaranteed a win in a case. I've lost cases in front of him, and I've known him before he even took the bench. But I find that he is extraordinarily diligent. He's extraordinarily smart, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I think our state judges and all state judges have an incredible heavy docket and heavy caseload. It's not just these civil cases, but they're handling criminal cases, murders. The circuit courts are handling felonies. You go to a motion docket hour and, there's 50 cases that he's hearing all at once, right? They're just overworked. Right. And so generally what you're getting in a lot of counties in the circuit courts is, a 1 or 2 page order that, not necessarily well researched, and it's not because the judges aren't smart, but it's just that they're overworked. Our state court system's overworked. You go to federal court and you get a well-reasoned, well-researched sort of lengthy opinion on most things because they don't have the same caseload. And so But the reason I really like this judge out in Boone is even when I'm wrong, I mean, you're getting, I call it federal quality decisions where you read it and you're like, you can follow the rationale like in a federal case. And so, I like that. I mean, not all attorneys do like that, but I like that in cases. And he does that in like every single case from a, rear end auto accident, you're getting well-researched, thorough opinions, everything else. And it doesn't mean I always agree with them, but I just appreciate sort of the legal scholarship that he puts in. And that's why I kind of like my cases over there. I will tell you, I've gotten the same thing though, out of other judges. It's not always consistent. And sometimes I think it just comes down to their caseload. I mean, all our state judges are
well, I think
overworked. So
right. Well, I think what's interesting too is and you made a post about on your Facebook the other day, and I think this is really telling. And I've mentioned it a few times that you said this in your post. Where, I mean, in a way, what's going on is Judge Shepard is giving Andy something to say out loud that seems to have some sort of validity, and in order for him to continue with his orders and his mandates. But at the same time, every time you guys, a case, now this case up in Boone and let's say Scott rule that no, Judge Shepard can't do what he's doing and everything else, what's that saying is that, well, what is going on is definitely has a good legal argument that it's not legal. But right. If he's got reasoning behind it and he's going to get his departments to enforce it, does it really become a law then? And you'd mentioned that if a law gets passed, but then the governor doesn't acknowledge it gets passed and comes up with some reason that it isn't in effect, however cockamamie that reason may be, and then gets his departments to enforce it, does it even become a law? Because now you have these businesses having to, like us and like others, having to go to court to try to get injunctive relief in order to get this handled.
I mean, it's really the tree falls in the forest argument. And nobody hears it. Does it really fall, right? I mean, it's kind of the same principle. I think it's interesting. I mean, if you think about it, if you really boil down the governor's arguments, it's that in an emergency that he gets to define, the length of which he gets to define, the scope of which he gets to define, in an emergency, the separation of powers and the ability of the legislature to legislate no longer counts because it's quote unquote disaster relief or emergency response. I think that's really a dangerous proposition, but it's an interesting proposition, right? Because if you're of the governor's political persuasion, it's great for COVID response, but what do you do maybe 5 years from now when it's not the same governor and there's a financial crisis and that new Republican governor that you think is the devil incarnate, like they thought former Governor Bevin was. He declares an emergency, and all of a sudden there goes your judicial and teachers' retirement and pension system because it's not sustainable anymore, and it went away with the stroke of a pen. And that's the implication, really, of these issues. That's an emergency by certain definitions. And if we're going to throw out the rule of law, which is effectively what the governor is arguing, that the rule of law should be thrown out, that we should disregard statutory enactments passed by the General Assembly come in with a quote, heavy presumption of constitutionality that have to be overcome beyond a reasonable doubt. And, that's standard. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. And Judge Shepard has sort of said, well, I mean, by the way, he's not even issued an order that this legislation is unconstitutional. All he has said so far is, well, there's a substantial question about their constitutionality, and bad things are going to happen if the governor can't, do his edicts, and so therefore here's your injunction.
Right.
The problem with that is, I think that puts sort of the cart before the horse. I mean, we're dealing with duly passed legislation by super majorities. It's like 70-20 that we're passing this stuff. And we have a single circuit judge of Franklin County purporting to enjoin it statewide. I'm hopeful we'll get something out of the Boone Circuit Court that flips that narrative on its head and says, look, that order is not worth the paper it's written on. You cannot enjoin legislation. You can enjoin enforcers, but the problem here is the enforcer is the governor. So, that's right. The problem with the entire governor's lawsuit. And I think Judge Brueggemann indicated on the record he agreed with everything I just said today. So I think we may get an order out of him maybe this afternoon or tomorrow on this amendment issue where he addresses that. He says, look, they say it's futile because of the Franklin Circuit thing. Franklin Circuit orders. It's not futile. The Franklin Circuit, orders that purport to enjoin legislation have no legal effect, and here's the cases that say so. And I think Judge Burgelman would be following precedent and entering that order. And I think we may see it this afternoon or tomorrow. So, I'm kind of hopeful we will. So, I think, what a mess. And it's really a mess for these small businesses. I thought it was really interesting. They went and they amended the daycare regulations yesterday because I was screaming about Senate Bill 148 with an amendment to the lawsuit. Was it a coincidence we were on the amendment today and they amended the regulation yesterday? And
we've all seen it time and time again in these cases. It's not a coincidence. He takes it right to the line, right until the judge is going to rule on something. And then if he thinks he's going to lose, he'll change whatever he's doing real quick and be like, it's moot point now, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's kind of famous for that game. And he's been playing it a while with a lot of this COVID stuff, the moving target issue. I think it's interesting. And I think, there's going to be a writ on Judge Shepard that's probably going to get filed the next couple of days by the legislature. And I mean, what a mess. What a mess. And, the governor, his lawyers were there today saying, we really respect the rule of law. And that's why we went and we got this Judge Shepard order. No, you don't respect the rule of law. If you did, you would comply with the rule, with the statutes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what the presumptions are. The legislative power is what it is. They have the ability to give and take away power. I mean, you don't respect the rule of law. You're just playing games so you can retain power. And, you've parked it in a forum. You literally judge shopped it down in the Franklin Circuit Court. Even though, we had a pending case up here in Boone County with truly adverse parties that were willing to sort of, go at it. And I look at this and I'm just like, what a mess. But, we'll keep fighting the fight that we need to fight. I mean, I think, I just, what a mess. So
do you think, let me ask you this, Chris, okay, betting man here. Okay. Let's take a little bet here.
Yeah.
All right. We can't tell the future. Okay.
The crystal ball is broken, as I like to tell people.
You can't tell the future.
Right.
So eventually this all ends up in front of the Kentucky Supreme Court.
That's
now, the Kentucky Supreme Court has a problem because they issued a judgment on the Acre v. Bashir case. Or Bashir v. Acre. Did I say that backwards?
No, I think it was Bashir v. Acre. Yeah.
Bashir v. Acre case. And they issued a judgment on that. And many of what the legislators did this session was literally based upon that ruling. What they said, hey, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, you got a problem with it, take it away, things like that. It goes to Kentucky Supreme Court. Do you think they end up ruling that these laws are somehow unconstitutional and arguing against their prior statements somehow? Or how do you think it plays out? Or do you think it's a 50-50 toss-up? I mean, what do you see happening there?
It's the subject of substantial debate. And, it's been the subject of debate among the legal circles that I'm aware of, lawyers that have very liberal leanings, which is most of the bar, conservative lawyers, people that are involved in litigation, lawyers that are not. I've had this discussion with, what are they going to do this time around? I think it comes to the court in a very different posture, right? I mean, first of all, the summer of 2020 into the fall of 2020, COVID was still hot. People were still scared. Part of it was, I think, political with the presidential election. I think that drove some of what was going on. I think, people would be dishonest if they didn't admit that. Now we've got, vaccinations are up.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different issue, but, vaccinations are up. Case rates are falling or are low, right? If you look at the case incident map on the Department of Health's website in Kentucky, the whole state's mostly yellow, not even orange or red under the governor's own metrics, which are fairly, aggressive metrics anyways compared to CDC. Death rate is falling. He's going and he's finding deaths that have already happened. And he's reclassifying them to try and keep the death rate up. I mean, I just don't think we're in the same position that we were before. And, right, they came in last in Acre and they said, look at Senate Bill 150. The legislature's okay with this. And, first-year law students, learn in constitutional law about Youngstown Sheet, the Youngstown Sheet case. And, when the president acts with the legislature and they're all in harmony, sort of government power is at its height, and when the legislature is silent and the president acts, it's a little bit more dicey. And if the president acts contrary to legislative power, well, that's a big old problem, right? Because think about it. If it's an executive, what is their function? Well, their function is to execute the law. They don't set the policy. They don't make the policy. They implement the policy. They execute. We have a governor that's arguing that no, the legislature doesn't get to set the policy anymore, right? I mean, that's his argument. It's unconstitutional for them to set the policy. And by the way, I don't agree with the policy they're setting, so I don't want to follow it. And I think I have these inherent sort of emergency powers for, I don't know, there's no time limit that he defines, that he has them for.
Right.
So
I think that's scary too. There is there's no parameter of when's it not an emergency. I mean, is they'll come to a point where we have, because right now we have 90 people in the ICU, right? Hospitals have 7% of their beds are taken up with COVID cases. So we have under 100, right? We have a positivity rate lower than 2%. We have all these other states that have lifted their mandates, ended the emergency mandates for the most part. At what point, I mean, I guess that's something the legislators should have done, is say something like, hey, this is what ends the emergency. I mean,
so they went. So I raised
legislators
because I was screaming for them to do that. Right, I was screaming for them to do that in House Bill 360, and the response I got back was, "Chris, we did that. That was HJR 77. We didn't need to define it because we felt like it was already time to end the emergency in terms of most of these orders, and so we did." And that's part of the argument that I've raised. It's under Senate Bill 150 of last year, 2020, Senate Bill 150. That this stuff's over. And that they have ended it. And so, there was no need to define it because they said, no, it's now, it's over. So, I look at that. I mean, I wish they would have done 360. I mean, Steve Rudy killing House Bill 360, I think, was one of the biggest failures of the legislative session.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they had passed 360, the governor would have a real problem on his hands right now, because you had tons of restaurants just telling them to kick rocks.
That's right.
Because they don't have to worry about losing their licenses. And, he's got to take each one to court, litigate it. And based upon that, he's right now, Boone County hasn't ruled yet, but he's right now he's one for two. He's got his case in Franklin County holding up his argument, but hey, out there in Scott County they're saying no. Boone County goes against him. That's 1 for 3.
Yeah, and the other side of it is the only thing you could do if House Bill 360 passed, and I think that would have been fully constitutional for them to pass it because it deals with the remedies. Is that he would have to go and get injunctions against every single business that was not following his orders, and then seek contempt. And as you're aware, that's not a very fast process. And I think had they done that, we would be seeing massive restaurant civil disobedience. I mean, we've got big restaurants up here in Northern Kentucky that are having real problems right now. I mean, Quaker Steak and Lube is a business sort of, that deals with, chicken.
Yeah, I saw an article about that they're having issues up there.
They had ABC come in and basically say, that they couldn't have service at the bar. They couldn't do their bike night where people would motorcycle in and eat chicken wings and hang out. And basically, that violated the governor's mandates. ABC came in and, threatened them. And none of that would be happening if Steve Rudy hadn't killed House Bill 360. And I look at this and, I mean, am I disappointed in many regards with this legislative session? I am, but I think one of the biggest failures was it was him killing House Bill 360 under some purported theory that, well, we shouldn't allow lawbreakers. Dude, the governor's violating the law. We knew he was going to do it. I mean, none of what's going on right now is a surprise to anybody that was paying attention. And if you ask Steve Rudy, he would probably say it wasn't a surprise to him. So if the governor's going to do that, why?
Well, I mean, he had taken it to court already. He was already fighting things in court when you had plenty of time to pass 360. Right. He's fighting it in court right now. That's exactly what he's doing. Why wouldn't you pass HB 360 now to put a quiver in the air? I mean, you should have probably impeached him. That would have been the ultimate remedy.
Right.
And I think I know how I feel about it. I know how you feel about it. And so, but at least passing HB 360 puts in a case where if you want to make the governor look really embarrassed, and that's the thing too, the thought process behind not impeaching, as it was reported to me, was that it would help the Republican Party look better because they could run against him and fundraise against him, and they wanted him in there because that's who they wanted to run against in 23 and so on and so forth. Because, he's so unliked, and that's what I was, like I said, reportedly told. That being stated, if that is your goal, wouldn't it make it much worse and more embarrassing to see all these restaurants just ignoring the governor because of something the Republican Party, as the legislator, gave to them as a tool? That would be their best way of being like, look at all this mass civil disobedience and embarrassment we caused for the governor. Reelect us, donate money to us. Instead, we see them sending out, in my opinion, I see them sending out, donation emails, trying to claim a whole lot of success out the legislative session that, if I go out and I ask the average Kentuckian, do you feel like the legislative session was a success? They'll say no. And the reason why is because they still have to wear a mask. They still have to capacity restrictions. I mean, Andy still says I can't have a beer past 12. All those things are still happening right here in Kentucky, and they just don't feel like that was a success for that reason. That was what we elected you in there to do.
If you go on RPK's Facebook page where they're like, check the box, the income box, check. A lot of people are like, no, we're not doing it this year. Like, you guys have failed, and we are out. And, I look at this legislative session, and I blame really House leadership for killing House Bill 360, because I do think they would have been able to raise the flag and say this was a success. Mm-hmm. We passed everything we could. We knew Shepard was doing what Shepard was going to do. We knew ultimately this was going to work its way through the courts. But you know what? We gave these businesses the sort of free license to disregard these ridiculous governor mandates that we chose not to extend. And we passed legislation, that would have protected these businesses to sort of have free reign, and we wouldn't be dealing with Quaker Steak and Lube, and we wouldn't, face an enforcement right now for.
Well, we have an ABC administrative hearing coming
up. Yeah,
what we see, there was like 60 some odd bars that are in process with the ABC over mandates to get their licenses taken away. For those who are unaware, What the ABC is doing is they're claiming I committed a misdemeanor, even though I never was charged or taken to court or actually charged with a misdemeanor. They're claiming, in their opinion, their administrative opinion, I committed a misdemeanor, and they want to take away my ABC license for that. I never need to spend a day in court not to actually be convicted of a misdemeanor for that to be taken away. And HB 360 would have stopped that. In fact, if we live streamed the pre-hearing or scheduling date or whatever we had there, and that was a big point we had to push off because HB 360 was in the works. And if that had passed, they would have had to have dropped the entire thing, Well,
and even beyond they could have at least made it perspective. And, and given businesses now.
At least moving forward, yeah.
Yeah, businesses now the ability to follow, sort of the path and without all this drama, and they didn't, and because Steve Rudy didn't want to quote unquote help lawbreakers, but that argument goes out the window when the biggest lawbreaker of all right now is the governor of Kentucky, who's refusing to follow duly passed legislation by supermajorities when it's his duty not only to follow it but to execute it and to faithfully ensure that it's followed. You talk about a broken system. You might think. As a reporter did recently, a reporter's like, oh, you're part of the death cult because you think the governor shouldn't be able to require vaccinations. Okay, mind you, dude, I'm pretty sure you and your party just supported 800,000 abortions last year, but let's not talk about 800,000 murdered innocent children. Let's focus on grandma in a nursing home who probably would have passed away and had multiple causes of death anyways, because that's what you're tracking. And you want to label us with the very thing that you are, which I think the left is famous for. So
well, and you look at too, and they want to say we're in a death cult. Meanwhile, they spent $202 million, the state did, on fit ups for COVID for schools, school age children's schools, where we've had, according to the CDC, because they only count confirmed deaths, 0 deaths under 20. Meanwhile, where all the deaths were occurring, senior living, they spent $193 million. They spent less money where all the deaths were than they spent on schools that we're empty most of the year anyways.
It's funny if you follow the governor's Facebook page and his cult of personality and all the people that follow him, the cult that follows him on there, you would assume that everybody was going to die without these mandates. And I just got back from spring break in Florida, and I kept looking around for like the piles of body bags. I thought they'd be carting people out of the hotels and the restaurants and body bags. The hospitals would be full and overflowing down there when DeSantis lifted his mandates. And I was thinking, surely Governor Beshear and the death cult, that they say that we are for thinking these mandates are nuts. Surely if they're right, where's the body bags piling the highways of Florida? And we drove around down there, we went out to eat, we hung out. I didn't see anybody in body bags. Maybe I'm just missing it. I saw how.
Well, they never really believed it, Chris. I mean, they still went out to the supermarket. They still, I love that. People come up yelling at you if you don't wear a mask. I've had some of those opportunities, where people will be like, you should really put a mask on. I'm like, you're not afraid of COVID. Get out of here. They're like, I'm frightened of it. I'm like, why are you near me not wearing a mask? I'm not wearing a mask. You should be over there hiding in the corner. Why are you getting up in my face about it? Like, you're clearly not that afraid of it,
it's not really about the body bags. It's about control. You boil it down. And, I think it's interesting. Cuomo gets a pass for shipping, COVID positive people into nursing homes and killing people literally.
That's kind of a non-story. You seen anybody talking about that?
That's not death cult, apparently. But Ron DeSantis for reopening the state of Florida with numbers dropping that, in the same proportion that they're dropping everywhere else, that is death cult, I guess. I
just remember, though, Chris, Andy's listening to the experts. Now, he's a lawyer. He's not a doctor. And it's clear he's making judgment calls because you have Texas that opened up and had 60,000 people at a football or baseball game unmasked, right? And then you have Kentucky where maybe if 900,000 more people get vaccinated, maybe he might let us out then.
Nobody wants to talk about this, but we took the deposition of Dr. Steve Stack last summer, and it took me about an hour and a half to finally get him to admit it. But he ultimately admitted that these restrictions had nothing to do with public safety or public health, and that they were fundamentally the governor making value judgments about what activities were important and which weren't. And I would have thought that admission under oath in a proceeding, would have been the end of it, because, if you're going to make admissions under oath that undermine every position that you're taking, as we are aware some other people have done in other contexts, when you make admissions under oath like that, it should have been the end of all of this.
Right.
And it was it absolutely was in the federal proceeding. Like, the federal courts looked at that and they're like, yeah, finally we got somebody to admit it. And,
right.
And it didn't really move the needle.
Well, it's not, and that's what's crazy too is, we've seen time and time again the CDC, Fauci coming out and literally admitting, like, yeah, we lied to you when we said that because we wanted you to do X. Fauci saying, well, I said to not wear masks because I was worried about masks being taken from the doctors, but now I'm telling you to wear masks because I know that you have masks. Like, that is lying to you to get you to behave in a certain way. And of course, I don't know if you've heard the Thomas Massey recorded phone calls between him and the CDC. I have, and they came out and admitted, yeah, we're trying to word this right to make sure that people don't get not vaccinated that maybe have already had think they've had COVID or something. And what's funny is they didn't say is that our testing is actually pretty inaccurate. So we're worried actually people that have been tested positive for COVID haven't actually had COVID yet because our testing sucks. And they didn't want to say that out loud either, And so, and I keep thinking every time I hear this, like, okay, surely this is the point where people hear it and they're like, this is dumb. This is dumb. I had a article I was sharing that was published on the National Institute for Health Technology. It's a .gov site. It's a government-funded entity that posted an article saying masks don't work. They're like, listen, we've looked at data last year, masks don't work. And I share that around, and oh my gosh, the same people that will post articles from that same place now will turn around and be like, no, this article's terrible. I'm like, it's from the same place you post from. They're like, oh, it only has 4 peer reviews. That one, you need at least 8 peer reviews for me to now listen to it. And so it never surprises me. So, the fact that under oath he had said that, well, it's all feeling, and there's no science behind it.
Value judgment. It's all the governor making value judgments.
The governor's making a value judgment, which is nothing more than a lawyer, because that's what he is. No offense, Chris, but he's a lawyer, making a value judgment, right? And I remember too when I was torn apart for saying, when they're deciding what to do with restaurants, they don't have all the experts in a room. They're not calling in any restaurant owners.
Right.
And they're like, why would you need restaurant owners? Well, what do they know about an infectious disease? They don't. But in the same way that Fauci was making a logistics decision that wasn't his to make because he's not a logistics expert, right? When he told you not to wear a mask, this is him saying that. In the same way, you shouldn't be making a decision about what to do with restaurants if you have no experience in the restaurant industry. That's right. And so I think that's really key there.
I think it's really interesting, right? I mean, let's talk about the CDC guidance in restaurants just for a minute because it affects your business.
Sure.
They just came out with guidance maybe 3-4 weeks ago that the school kids can sit in a classroom 3 feet apart. I'm sure you saw that. 3 feet was the distance.
Yeah, if they have partitions. Mm-hmm.
Even without partitions.
Oh, even without partitions. Okay.
3 feet apart.
Yep.
And what Dr. Stack admitted last summer, and this is still true, if you go on the World Health Organization website to look at coronavirus restrictions and things that COVID talks about, they recommend 3.5 feet for distancing purposes, which is a big. I mean, as you're aware, the 6 foot thing for distance in restaurants and tables is much bigger than.
The capacity carrot doesn't matter at this point if you're not going to take away the 6 foot.
Not the 60%; it's the 6 foot distancing, right? Mm-hmm. And I learned that last summer in dealing with Kentucky Restaurant Association and the Speedway case and the restaurant issues, and that is all still true. I mean, all of that is true. But from the outset of COVID, the World Health Organization recommended 3.5 feet distancing. And the reason is that's the distance in a normal conversation that sort of your secretions and when you talk, that's the distance that things project is 3 feet. Now, as you know, it's only projecting one way, which is the way that you're facing. I mean, when I'm talking, it's heading, if you there's a little bit of spittle, it's headed, in one way you're talking to. And, unless you're turning your head around or you're whipping your head around. And we asked Dr. Stack about that on the stand last summer, and he admitted that if people aren't turning around, it's going about 3.5 feet, unless the volume in the restaurant rises and people are talking louder, and then it may go a little further. But he basically admitted that the 3 feet was the deal. But the reason they do 6 and the CDC did 6 was to build in a safety factor. So they've doubled the distance, to get to the 6 feet. And that is
because once again, they're lying to you.
Well, again, that's the science.
They're like, I can't trust you with the truth. I'm afraid you may not behave the way I want you to.
Right. I mean, but that's the real science behind it. Is it's a 3 foot distance issue, 3.5, but 3.5 foot distance issue. And my point last summer was, why don't we at least allow the restaurants to do tables where people are at least back to back 3.5 feet? Because now, so at least then you've got the distance from me to the next table over is you're going to be closer to that 6 foot because that's the distance that I'm projecting. And we tried to make that argument. Of course, it kind of went nowhere. But I find it interesting now to see them sort of walking that back for schools, saying now 3 feet's good for schools. Well, if it's good for schools, it's good for restaurants, it's good for everything else. And it probably should have been the standard all along. And it wasn't for quote unquote safety reasons. And so if we really want to talk about the science, that's the real science, right? Not sort of government value judgments about how much of a safety factor we should build and everything else. But, I look at this stuff, whether it was banning church. I mean, that was a value judgment. Church wasn't important. Factories and groceries were, right? And, I just, protests. I mean, that was the most egregious thing that we did with the governor was the protest case. He was, decrying the people that were protesting his lockdown restrictions and sort of saying they were bad actors who should be, criminally thrown in jail and they're criminals. And, along comes Black Lives Matters. And those protests, not only does COVID not spread within those protests, because COVID knows the difference about the speech, those protests were worth the possibility of COVID spreading from a
Well, I mean, the CDC has decided that, racism is a public health crisis that is more important than COVID, which is
value judgment. So
yeah, I'd love to see the science there to know that for a fact. Well, can I see some data on death instances due to race compared to COVID? I'm interested.
I mean, it's all value judgment stuff. And, when you do what I do, which is, constitutional litigation and a whole bunch of it, government can't be making value judgments on the exercise of fundamental rights. We call that viewpoint discrimination, and that's a big giant problem. And we litigated that. Obviously, the Sixth Circuit issued a published decision in the Ramsey case that was fairly, just trashed the governor for what he was doing for doing that stuff. That got no press, because the media loves the governor, and there you go. But I look at this stuff and I'm like, in what world am I living where legislative enactments don't matter, where the Constitution doesn't really matter until there's an injunction issued against the governor and then I'll back down. I mean, I just, I look at this stuff and I'm like,
You never thought you'd be here.
No, right?
Like, when you're taking constitutional law, you were like, never am I going to have to sue the same governor 10 times a year for like, I never thought I'd have to be like arguing that somebody can go to church without being arrested, right? Like, you never thought that had to be an argument.
No, I mean, and what I do, and what I've been doing since 2012, I mean, we'll have one or two big constitutional cases a year, right? I mean, not 4 or 5 a year. I mean, we'll have 1 or 2 a year tops that were big. I mean, I'm not talking about sort of the run-of-the-mill cases where we're dealing with a local code enforcement officer or, a police officer that sort of violates the Fourth Amendment. And, there's not sort of what I'm going to call bread and butter, but I'm talking about the bigger constitutional cases that we've done 1 or 2 a year. I mean, there were 4 in 2020 and we've got, a couple in 2021 already. I mean, this governor is like setting a record. And, we just got back from vacation. My wife, and I really enjoyed the vacation. And my wife's like, when do you want to go again? And I'm like, let's take another vacation at the end of summer with the kids. And she's like, can we afford it? And I'm like, well, Governor Beshear's paying for it. So, why not?
Because every time you win in court, you get to hit him with attorney fees.
In federal court, that's true, yeah.
For anyone who's unaware of what he means by Governor Beshear's paying for it, every time Chris wins in federal court, he gets his attorney fees covered by the government there. So, well, hey, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having on. Yeah, well, and I think, lots of big stuff. Obviously, there's litigation in the Supreme Court on the Shepard orders and the Scott County orders. There's some stuff pending up there. We've got a May 17th trial date to sort of take it statewide for restaurants and bars. And like I said, I think the final takeaway is we've got, oh, by the way, I guess our reply is due Monday on your injunction on the impeachment costs. We got so we got a busy week this week, but
sure.
We'll keep plugging along, and people have questions. We're around. I try and be responsive, but we have a lot of irons in the fire right now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Chris, so much.
Yep. See you.
All right, I'll see you. All right, guys, that was Chris Wiest joining us just to have a little discussion about some of the legal things he has going on, some interesting things. I encourage you to follow his page. He's got a personal page, Chris Wiest, and also a law firm page. He owns his own law firm there. He is, full disclosure, my attorney in many cases. When I deal with constitutional issues, I do also have criminal attorneys and family attorneys and all kinds of different business attorneys too. So, but Chris is when we're dealing with constitutional issues, my go-to attorney. And then real quick, I wanted to talk about the protest today. We had 296 people show up. We did do an official head count. Of course, WKYT has already issued a headline saying dozens of people protest, and I go, well, I guess if you want to call 24 dozens of people, and that's the way you want to do it, I guess that's what it is. But, that's to be expected, right? They're going to twist that a little bit. They're going to change up that headline a little bit to fit the narrative they're looking for, which is to say there's not a lot of support out there. But I tell you this much, 300 people showing up in the pouring rain on a Wednesday with 2 days' notice, that's a fair amount. We're going to be gathering again Sunday at 2 p.m., this Sunday at 2 p.m., same place there, right by the governor's mansion. And we are going to keep going because we need to show support as far as where we stand. We need to take a stand. It's very important we stand out there. And I had a lot of people tell me for a conservative protest, that was the best one they've been to in a long time because there's normally not a lot of chanting. It's more rallying. This is more chanting, more protesting, more simple ideas, right? That's the way we're going to try to keep it. as well. And I thank you guys for remaining peaceful as much as you can when you come out. I know there's a gentleman that, he kind of wanted to do a little bit of mass burning. I was like, it's kind of raining. And I don't think that's a good optic for the media for us to do it. Of course, they'll probably still take pictures of it or something, even though nothing occurred. There's no mass burnt. But what do you expect from the media, right? So I invite you guys, come on out, bring friends. Sunday at 2 o'clock, send emails, send texts, drag them out, do everything you can, share our page with them. I don't care. Let's try to we had 300 people there Wednesday. I bet you we can get 500 people out there Sunday at 2 o'clock, and I think that's a good goal, and we need your help to get there. So please help us do it. As well, I wanted to talk about go woke or go broke. All these companies now going woke, these national companies, Ford, GM, things like that, they're starting to get involved too in politics, make statements about voting laws. Of course, my big concern about it is that if you want to claim IDs are racist and these laws are racist, you're doing it for one reason, and that is because you like voter fraud. That is the reason why. The IDs are not racist. You just like voter fraud. And so it's alarming to me to see these big companies say they like voter fraud. Also, as well, it gives you pause to think. See, the problem is as these companies become more open about their politics, you have a decision to make. I'll give you an example. This morning, I was thinking about making a post saying this and saying, hey, I ended up just saying we need to start voting with our dollars so we don't fund our own destruction. Because, of course, they donate these dollars to the people that want to destroy our liberties, and they are funding them doing it. And so watching where you spend your money is important. And one of the things I thought about posting is, for an example, here in Kentucky, you can buy beer from Goodwood that sued the governor, or you can buy beer from West 6th. And West 6th is owned by a guy named Ben Self. Ben Self, up until a few months ago, was the Kentucky State DNC chair. So I imagine when you buy West 6 Brewing and West 6 beer, the profits made off purchasing that beer is the same way that when you buy our coffee or you donate to us, donate.brewedco.com, that money is going towards fighting for the things we believe in. I am sure that money ends up in the pockets of the DNC members, of course. He's clearly bought his way there. I thank you guys for joining me. You have a great day.